Morning, everybody. How you feeling? So we're going to do our best to kind of simultaneously take you through a little bit of a light workout, introduce some different anatomy ideas, and not touch our faces to the absolute best of our ability here. Other than that, it's going to be a nice Monday morning for foundation training. I'll start right away with taking us through a brief workout, and then Jesse's going to jump in and take us through a little bit more of a brief workout. Jesse will do a little modeling for you here if you want to say hello, Jess.
Good morning, everybody.
Right on. All right. If you're here, shake your body off a little bit. I hope it's warm and sunny where you are. If it's not, I hope it is soon. We're going to start off with lunge decompressions, standing decompression, and a spiral lunge. If you can't hear me, I can't hear you, and I wish we could do better. Left foot forward, right foot back. Chin back, chest up. Big measuring sticks for the decompression breaths, and the focus here is that the elbows are wide. They're not pulling back behind you like a chicken. They're pulling wide. They're not pulling forward. They're pulling wide. Chin back, chest up. You're going to take a few big decompression breaths in this position, and if you look at Jesse, you're going to see that he's working really hard to get the base of his skull, the back of his skull, up pretty high, kind of lean. From there, he's got those measuring sticks, making sure that the rib cage has enough separation up off the pelvis. And the pelvis, the bony structure right below the torso, is squeezing towards midline from the hip joints. The feet are in the same line facing forward. And the body is pulling towards center like a pair of scissors closing between the legs as the skull lifts away from that central tension. The arms come forward into a sphere of tension. When you're in this position, don't let your sternum drop. Stay tall, stay broad, stay wide. When the arms are forward, I want you to think of every joint in the fingers being bent. Think of maybe the biggest grapefruit you can fit into your hands. You just barely fit it there. The hands barely touch, but then they start to squeeze together. When they start to squeeze together, that kind of translates to the back of the shoulders, the front of the chest, the pec muscles, to the circumference of the neck. And you're trying to get longer, 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 and wider in each of those. Let's go 2 or 3 more decompression breaths where we're breathing wide into the rib cage. In through the nose if you can. 1 or 2 more. Now, as you exhale, go ahead and step out of that. Shake your shoulders out a little bit. See how you feel on the right side versus the left side. Notice if there's any kind of a difference side to side there before we get into the other one. Sorry, I keep sniffling. It's really cold outside where I am right now. One of the interesting things about foundation training, and I know that a lot of other movement programs have similar things, but you can really tell the difference of the side you just work these exercises, especially as we move into hinging exercises. So notice the difference, kind of check your ranges of motion from your head to your toes for a moment, just feel what they feel like. And then we'll move into the right foot forward, left foot back. Let's go into that same measuring stick position, thumbs at the rib cage, pinkies at the pelvis. Find that bony structure at the front of the pelvis. Don't just arbitrarily do this. Don't kind of do it half-assed like that. Stand yourself up very big. Pull the chin back. Get really broad. Find the bony structure of the pelvis. Find the bony structure of the rib cage, and then pull the two apart as you stand as tall as you can with the hips squared in. The skull, the back of the skull in particular, lifting away from the feet as far as it can go to make you as tall as possible. And then the center line of the legs pulling towards each other like a pair of scissors closing. So that's what this position, this measuring stick position is all about. When we pull the elbows apart as wide as they can pull without the hands leaving the body, that allows us to widen the rib cage, to widen the lats, to widen the traps, and to flatten out the clavicles that in a lot of people tend to aim down. breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth, or out through the nose too. And find that height of the clavicles. Find the width of the lats and the ribs, and the elbows. See if you can couple that height and width for 5 or 6 breaths. Keep lifting the base of the skull, and the weight of the head is more or less being taken into these front SCM, sternocleidomastoid muscles. You don't want to pinch off the back of your neck for the sake of kind of extension. You want to lift the front to a certain height and then kind of carry the back to that same height. So if you were in this position, I know it's been a minute, I want you to look up, 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 and then pull the chin back just slightly to meet that height. Bring the arms into that sphere of tension position if you haven't already. And from there, it's width, the whole circumference of the torso. I want you to be wide. I want you to take the base of the skull and really focus 100% on that for a moment, just pulling. Finding that SCM muscle, that sternocleidomastoid pull, that actually is a lift of the back of the head, coupled with a lift of the sternum and clavicles. Let's take 2 more deep breaths. Focus pretty heavily right between the shoulder blades. Now, a lot of people tend to retract and squeeze their shoulder blades together when they're doing foundation training, and that's not the goal here. The goal is to have a tone of the shoulder blade against the rib cage, and I'll explain that later with anatomy of the serratus musculature. But just think that the shoulder blade is not trying to move independently. It's being pushed wide by the rib cage. It's not trying to squeeze in towards center. In fact, if anything, it's trying to be breathed out away from center as it rides the expansion of an inhalation. So think of that idea as you take 2 or 3 more deep breaths. Hope you are anticipating long poses. And then just go ahead and relax, shake it off a little bit. Check in with your body. Move the legs around a little bit. And this is just the first pose, and we're going to do several. So move around a bit. I wish I could see questions. It's so strange to teach to a screen, but I guess for a little while this is the new normal, so hey, might as well try to get good at it. Let's go into a standing decompression, but we're going to do it from a wider stance position. All right? So I'm going to try to get where you can see my feet here. So in this position, I'm in a wider position, but I'm still adhering to the basic tenets of foundation training, which are subtle internal rotation of the hip joints, a spread of the foot from the ball joint of the big toe wide to the ball joint of the pinky toe, and then to the kind of the pinpoint of the heel, like a triangle, where the point is in the back and it gets very wide towards the front of the foot, as wide as possible. That tension is either spread out against the ground or pulled in towards center. Either way, if you watch my knees, they don't move that much. If I spread the floor or if I constrict and contract the floor, there's not a huge movement. I'm not doing this or this. Okay? I'm pressing from the hip joint out or from the hip joint in. So let's do a big standing decompression in this shoulder width or wider position. Big decompression breath. Thumbs at the rib cage, pinkies at the pelvis. The chin is going to lift and you're going to gather as much length from the back of the neck to meet it. And that should make it feel like your body just kind of zipped up towards center. So take 5 or 6 decompression breaths in this position. Keep spreading the feet out. You'll notice I kind of dorsiflex my ankles a few times, just moving a little bit, kind of getting as many muscles activated as I can. And then I'm going to go right back into that breathing pattern. Big into the ribs. Out of a narrow belly. Big into the ribs. Feeling the SCM muscles contract out of a narrow belly. We're going to then go into a simple decompression position with the arms in a sphere of tension ahead of us. The shoulders are not going to roll forward. You're going to be wide. I want everybody to pull your shoulder joints apart, straight away from each other, as wide as you can. Hold that position, squeezing the legs inward or pushing them outward, whichever one feels better, but from the hip joint. We're going to hold that for about 8 to 10 decompression breaths, feeling the back out, letting the shoulder joints dive forward. So the difference is no, yes. So no retraction, no protraction. Find neutral and be as big as you can. 2 or 3 more breaths. Looking good, Jesse. What if it's just us? Nobody's watching. We're just doing this together.
I'm okay with that.
All right. Yeah, right? Shake it off a little bit. Wouldn't be that abnormal.
Thanks for the workout, Eric.
So rest a little bit, shake it off. Shake it off. Excuse me. So Jesse, why don't you take us through a founder?
Okay. Yeah, I've been practicing since quarantine, getting really good at talking to just a screen, guys. Only problem is I start talking too much because no one's telling me to shut up. So let's take our legs nice and wide. Think of wider than shoulder width apart. So when we take our legs nice and wide, look for that subtle degree of internal rotation. So if these are my feet, I turn them in ever so slightly. Once we've got that subtle degree of internal rotation, find the pads of your feet. So pick up the toes for a minute. Push through the pads of your feet. As you can see, Eric, he's taking time right now. We're going to find those pads of the feet. Think about rooting into them and a subtle centration now towards the big toe pad, that internal rotation. Start to try to wrinkle the floor between both feet. Let the arms come out to a long wing position. So we're out here off the line of our hips, and we're active through the fingertips. So arms out long. We got a nice drawing towards center of the hips. Lengthen up through the crown of the head. Let's go 5, slow and controlled. Hips and hands reach away from each other. And then slowly pull yourself back up. Try to feel the hips initiate. The weight shifts to the heels. As the hips reach back, hands reach forward. And there's just a subtle knee bend. As your hips pull back, the knees respond and unlock. So watch as I go. My hips begin to reach back. My knees respond, but they're being pulled back with the hips. And then we'll pull ourselves back up. Let's go 3 more, slow and controlled. Hips and hands get to reach away from each other. And back up. Hips and hands reach away from each other. See if we can maintain that internal rotation of the feet, pushing into that big toe pad. Back up. This last one, let's hold it. Hips and hands reach away from each other. Check in. The knees are unlocked, but we're not dumping into the knees. We're pulling those hips up and back behind the heels. We're wrinkling the floor. We're squeezing the fingertips. Look down the line of the fingers. Lengthen through the back neck. You should feel that low back turning on right now, the whole low back. Squeeze the fingertips. See if you can get those lats firing. Try to spread the floor now. See if you can feel the outer chains of the legs turn on. Keep squeezing the fingertips. Pull the hips and hands a few more inches away from each other. Start to wrinkle the floor slowly. Over the next 10 seconds, we're going to start pulling the hips up. Think of lengthening through the crown of the head, tensioning towards center with the feet, coming up nice and tall to that starting position, and then just shake it off. So guys, I think Eric gave us a nice warm-up. I felt it. I'm going to go with that. Maybe we'll finish with a few more movements afterwards, but let's get into some anatomy with Eric.
Cool. Bear with me. I am still relatively not that good at technology, but I'm going to do my best here if I do everything right, you're going to see a really cool anatomy image in a moment.
In the meantime, Eric, you made me think of the book I'm reading, talking about powerful postures influencing mindset. 2-minute, the TED Talk. They wrote about it in Stealing Fire. If you guys haven't read it, check it out.
Oh, what was the name? What was that woman's name? Is it Amy Cuddy?
So this is the book. Yep, in it, Amy Cuddy. And real quick, not to take you totally off task, I see it's come up, but power poses, meaning the posture of dominance, changed both psychology and physiology. They saw increases in testosterone and decreases in stress hormone cortisol. So chin back, chest up, work on those power postures. Go ahead, Eric.
Work on those power postures. So, Jesse, if this goes haywire, I'm going to rely on you because I can't see the screen other than anatomy. So let me know if it goes weird or if you can't see it for some reason.
Okay. I got a good clear view.
But for right now, I'm going to go into, now there's going to be a lot of decompression anatomy, but I want to start with pelvic anatomy briefly. And if you look at the screen, what you're going to see is kind of the convergence point of some really important muscles. What we're looking at right now is the adductor group as it converges into the pubic symphysis. Okay, so the adductor group is composed of kind of like these guys here. And these muscles, they all converge very uniformly into this point right here. Or actually, let's even go better. Bilaterally, right next to this point, which is the pubic symphysis. It's kind of like the largest disc in the body. It's a very similar material to the discs in the spine. And there's a lot of pressure that is needed here. That pressure, that stability, like skyscrapers have a little bit of a give. They can't be too rigid. You know, we've heard things like that before. There has to be this little bit of elasticity in very stable structures. And the way that the adductor group pulls at the pubic symphysis kind of creates this all the time counter tension right about here. That counter tension yields a healthy IT band, yields a healthy psoas muscle. Okay? It yields a healthy iliacus muscle. But without that central pull being accurate, we have a very, very hard time finding center, finding centration. What we need to think about is this right here. Hang on. People are getting a feeling of what it's like as I improvise during the cert right now. Okay. So this femur bone, that femur bone has a rotational capacity to it because it's a ball and socket joint at the hip, and that ball and socket rotation has a lot more to do typically with the femur than with the rest of the body rotating around the femur. It's typically the femur rotating. That rotation of the femur has an attachment point to the entire adductor group. That adductor group lines the whole inner lining of the medial femur. And when that femur head is rotated well, meaning like you're not squeezing your butt muscle all the time, your hips aren't turned out, your feet aren't turned out at, 45 degrees or more away from each other, that central tension is really easy to perpetuate. It kind of perpetuates the strength of the posterior chain when that central lining is in its neutral centered, what feels to us very much right now like internal rotation positions. And it's actually that centration. It's the adductors being accurately pulled towards center that allows all of this tissue in the back. Now you can't see the hamstrings right now. You can't see the other muscles, but you can see the glutes and you can see the adductors. And that's what I want you to be able to see. Because that's the reciprocal relationship. It's not quads and glutes or quads and hamstrings. It's not flexors, extensors. The body doesn't flex and extends. It twists and turns. So let's take that into account and recognize that there's not really a flexion extension paradigm that we're playing with anymore. It's rotational capacity and rotational angles. And one of the most powerful reciprocal relationships, I'll call it reciprocal facilitation instead of reciprocal inhibition, is the healthy contraction of the adductor facilitating the healthy eccentric contraction of the glutes and the IT band. Eccentric is when a muscle is learning to go from a very shortened, tightened position into a lengthened, longer, elastic, potentiated, ready to spring, ready to contract position. When you squeeze your ass all the time, as many things teach us to do, yes, you make this tissue stronger, but you make it very strong at being short and tight. And what you want is to make this tissue not short and tight, but accurate. You want it to have an effective contraction length, an effective contraction vector. You want that adductor to have a very healthy contraction vector, meaning it's pulling accurately in the right direction. Its forces are dispersed relatively evenly among its many muscle fibers, and those forces converge to the pubic symphysis. And that converging tension, that inward twisting, that feeling like the scroll is closing inward at your pelvis, that wrapping, that's what allows the glute muscle to have its incredible power, its incredible agility. It's very, very, very important to get this adductor into line. And that's why in all of our poses, with the exception of the gorilla lift, the surf squat, and the regular squat, other than those three poses, everything is internally rotated in foundation training. And it's to facilitate accurate glute contraction eventually. If that didn't confuse the hell out of you, let's keep going. Way up to the head. So let's talk about the psoas muscles. The psoas muscles are such an interesting muscle. I've talked with 2 or 3 patients recently. I'm still seeing a lot of patients via FaceTime over this period here. And I've talked to a number of patients recently about the increased tension that they're feeling at the lower back, even though they haven't done anything to tense their lower back. They haven't gone to the gym. They haven't really been sitting as much, actually, as they typically do. They haven't been driving as much as they typically do. But shit, if they're not feeling fear, I don't know. And something very unique about the psoas muscle is its innervation and its capacity to, not its innervation, but its capacity to affect the vagus nerve, which pierces it. So it's not that the psoas is innervated uniquely necessarily. It's that through the tissue of the psoas muscle punctures in a lot of people the vagus nerve, and tension at the psoas muscle, tension in our life, tension that kind of creates a convergent body pattern. Paul, real quick. Wait, never mind. It's not Paul's job. It's my job. When your not shortens, the rib cage doesn't shorten itself, but when the tissue between the rib cage and the pelvic structure shortens, in this, it's you're seeing the lat and the thoracolumbar fascia, but when this whole area shortens, it wreaks havoc on the body. And it's completely within the healthy ranges of motion of the body to flex the spine, to extend the spine, and all of that. But when the sternum drops and when the rib cage kind of becomes a weight atop the abdomen and the liver and the diaphragm, kind of, and the obliques and the digestive tissue, when that weight becomes the norm, the psoas muscle is heavily, heavily shortened. And it becomes adaptively shortened. Any of my physical therapist friends will have learned that term many, many times. And an adaptive shortening is just that. It's just a muscle that has adapted to a very high functioning, crappy position. The position being too short. Muscles do not like to go from short to shorter. The psoas in particular doesn't. And the reason people feel more back pain when the psoas is shortened, or when we're sad, or when we're anxious, or when we're stressed, whatever it is that psoas muscle is short. And when it shortens, it pulls the low spine. It pulls compression and flexion into these joints and into that ligament and into these discs. And that space needs space. It needs room. It has to have room. That's it. I mean, there's nothing fancy to it. You want to see where the body compresses the most. It's right about there. That's the biggest area of compression in the human body, is right around there, right in between those points. The sacrolumbar junction. The back, you can't really see it here, but I can hide this. I can fade this. And if I fade this, you can see that that lat is overlying a ton of tissue. And when the rib cage here just comes too close to the glutes and pelvis here, buddy, it hurts, plain and simple. It leads to less efficient breathing, less efficient movement, less efficient signaling to digestive organs, to the brain, all of it. It's a slew of things. Now, the best place to make this all accurate, to help that convergence that I'm talking about there, happens to actually be here. The body is a very connected unit. Right about there, right there, you can really see the leverage point. That is the leveraging for length in the rib cage, abdomen, and torso, especially here. The sternocleidomastoid muscle is a massive, massive lever. And when it goes out of position, your body's not going to be very comfortable. That sternocleidomastoid is capable of pulling the back of the skull down towards the clavicle very easily. But with just a tiny little bit of leveraging, of kind of awareness and focused breathing, we can create a pull on this muscle that instead of pulling the back of the skull, will pull the sternum towards the back of the skull, leveraging the front of the chest up. Now, the front of the chest is going to be pushed up through expansion. That's one of the big features of the rib cage, is there is a sternal lift with healthy breathing. There is also a bigger retroactive movement at the posterior rib cage. So even though you want that front pull of the SCM, what that pull is really doing is establishing a healthy communication here and here. You know what? Let me change this image real fast. I got better ones. So this is the leverage that allows healthy centration at the hip joints, pubic symphysis, the pelvis, the femurs, the shoulder joints, all of that. This is the area that influences that tissue. Honestly, more than the feet, more than the knees, more than the hips and the femur heads themselves. It's influenced by the capacity of the torso to lift away from the pelvic bowl, the pelvic lining, the pelvic wings. When the torso can lift appropriately, it's easy to pull towards center. If you think of the old finger traps where you pull from below and above and the center becomes extremely long, narrow, and tight, the body does not work all that differently. You can see the convergent bilateral pull at the sternum by the sternocleidomastoid muscles. That pull, that lift at the sternum, also facilitates healthy pec minor, also facilitates healthy serratus anterior. That serratus anterior, as it healthfully contracts at the rib cage, also pulls directly into the inner border of the shoulder blade. So all these muscles hit the low border of the shoulder blade. And then you go to the pec minor and check this out. It hits the upper border of the shoulder blade. How convenient is that little pulley system? So you got that on the same side of the body pulling against that. The body is a genius. It's incredible how that was put together. Then you go to the back and you see the expansive muscles of the serratus posterior superior. I didn't add the inferior here. Don't worry about that. That'll be another lesson sometime. But more or less, what I want you to understand is that in order for the pulleys that expand the rib cage, such as this one, or central pulley of the SCM at the top of the sternum and the adductors at the bottom of the pelvis must be accurately lined up. And if it's not, it ain't going to work that well. Pop out of this, back onto maybe a little discussion. I'm going to different thing. One. Difficult, at least.
There. Dust. Anybody? Academy. And now.
Yeah. They go back. Inflammatory arthritis is where actually they wake up feeling much better, and then throughout the day they feel significantly worse. It's a little bit of a different thing to deal with, but more important than that is that the reason you wake up stiff is likely actually a good thing. Your body's not terribly inflamed necessarily. You just have an arthritic, osteo-type, bony-type degeneration, and that degeneration dehydrates while you're laying. Rehydration occurs as it doesn't occur as easily because of the bony changes. So what I would suggest, learn our basics of learn how to twist the iliacus muscles. We teach it in the exercise. We teach it on the apps. We have it on many resources. But learn how to use the iliacus muscle. If you look on the anatomy thing, I'm going to actually show you these muscles and make myself useful while we're figuring out the technical stuff. So that iliacus muscle right there that lines the inner wing, there's one there, one there. They kind of go along with the psoas muscle. If your back is sore in the morning, or your shoulders are sore in the morning, or your neck is sore in the morning, I actually want you to start right there and right there. And I want you to turn the feet towards each other, turn the heels away from each other, and let the knees roll towards each other, like scrolls, closing in the center to start anchoring position. And that will probably quickly give you at least a small relief. You carry that with you, and when you stand up, you make sure that when you put your foot on the ground, you pay attention to the ball of the big toe, the ball joint of the small toe, the ball joint of the heel. I guess there's not a ball joint in the heel, but the heel. You press those points into the ground, and you make sure that your force is going through muscles. And this is first thing in the morning. This is like morning meditation. Everybody thinks they have to go sit in a corner to meditate. No. Put your foot on the ground and feel every piece of the foot that hits the ground. Feel that transfer into the accurate muscles of the groin muscle, the hip muscle, the hamstring muscle, the lower back muscles. Feel the abdomen engage. Feel your neck muscles pull towards center instead of letting your head drift forward and hurt your back a little more. The reason you hurt in the morning is a very natural reason. You're stagnant. You haven't moved much. It will feel better the better you move and the faster you get into movement, not necessarily the faster you move. So think of that as a pretty
All right, I had one more for you if you're ready for it.
Yeah, let's do
What do you have of opposite question mark?
Great question. Oh, okay. That right here. Kind of enlarge this guy a little bit. So the subocciput is going to pop up right here when I put it on. But just know that it's between kind of this bone, these bones. There's a couple muscles that are very, very significant. Let me get into the little search feature here. Let me see if they just have suboccipital. There. Can you see the little blue thing I just added?
Naif. Oh,
You look right at the base of the skull.
Yes. Oh.
Okay, cool. Now you should see a lot of stuff. Yeah, there should be a ton of stuff now. So the reason that a lot of cervicogenic headaches occur, a lot of neck tightness occurs, a lot of even throat disorders, maybe even some compressions of the thyroid gland. Who knows how impactful this stuff is? A lot of tension headaches from the levator scapula muscle, which is this muscle here. It attaches the shoulder blade to the neck. That blue say, oh, that's where that came from. And then you feel that neck tension right at the top of your neck. Guess what? One of many twists and turns of the body. It's often leveraged from here. Then this tension at that lower border of the larger portion of that muscle in blue, where it attaches to the shoulder blade, man, that's affected by breathing. That's affected by lat function. That's affected by length of the abdomen more than almost anything. Healthy is because it's the biggest muscle in that area. I mean, I know a lot of people think that the traps are the biggest muscle in the neck and certain attachment points of the traps go up there, but that's really a back muscle. The traps are really an upper back muscle, whereas the SCM is pure length and accurate direction, accurate range of motion, healthy rotation, and healthy flexion of the neck. So the first thing that I would say to any neck patient with any kind of neck pain is let's see how accurate and healthy the contraction of the SCM is. From there, let's work on breathing expansion, not recruiting the shoulder joints in your breathing, but instead breathing entirely into the cage, into the rib cage, below the shoulder joints, utilizing the lats, utilizing the serratus muscles. That will, from that shoulder blade that is inaccurately pulling on the levator scapula, that will very quickly shift tension away from the back of the skull being pulled into the neck when our head drifts forward, looking up. Think of that anterior neck carriage, forward head posture. Those muscles do not at all like to be constricted. They don't like to be shortened very much. They are absolutely capable of looking up and turning and rotating and all of that. But you don't want to get them stuck in that position because there's just some really important stuff that happens. That's more or less, that's the cerebellum, the brainstem, the greater occipital nerve, the vertebrobasilar artery. Some really, really important tissue is kind of in this general vicinity, and it really needs some room to thrive. So the fix for necks is compression. It's learning to do the founder very well without the shoulders hiking up against your neck. It's learning the hip hugger position and the platter hands position and the mofo position. And all of these are in our app. I mean, we have this foundation training we, they have the capacity to walk you through these exercises. A lot of these exercises have the capacity to walk you through life a lot more comfortably. So I suggest
Eric, one of the things I want to touch on everybody that is going through this, and as you're hearing it, is what Eric said about strong. He's targeting to and functioning well. That's why any athletes I work with, they're realigning their body, they're pulling it into more muscle recruitment, and then whatever they're going that training or that sport. So that's why exercise should I do for that? And I always go back to, because that's how it operates. And that's all I have to say about that.
Let me get back. Let me get back to, I think Paul is saying that we should be good. I shouldn't be frozen any longer. Ooh. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Talking about earlier, a wide and then a narrow standing fundamental changes in foundation and the expansion of the rib cage, not at the expense of the neck and shoulder. Founder first, since we already did one of those with Jesse, we'll go just a little bit wider. Bring the outside edges of the feet parallel, but the legs pretty wide. About you're not tucked under. Your pelvis is pulled down. Your hips are pulled in. Your neck is up, and the back of your neck is long. Away, feel tension throughout the whole body as you're trying to just stand up as tall as you can. We'll add that simple measuring stick just because this is how we make that tightness, that finger trap type sensation occur. We're squeezing towards center at the feet, at the hip joints, and we're lifting away from that to the best of our ability with the entire torso. So think of that whole cage, anatomy that I showed you, the rib cage. Breathe into it as wide and deep as possible. Keep that tension at the feet, at the hips, at the groin. Draw the hips back. So as you inhale, it leverage the torso up, especially the back of the rib cage up, back. Draw the hip joints back into a hip, allowing the knees to bend. From the side, what that looks like is a subtle knee bend. You're not in a squat. A subtle knee bend, a big back, and we'll bring the arms forward into a sphere of tension. What I want you to feel in that position is as the hips hinge, pretty intensely increase the adductor muscle contraction. Press that into the big toe joint and then push the small toe away just a little bit and then into the ground. Pull the chin back and up. Feel the back of your body engaging. And then with the arms in front of you in that sphere of tension, try to breathe just below your armpits for maybe 5 or 6 breaths. Literally, just into that kind of outer edge flank where you saw. If you're doing it well, it should not be very easy. It should feel. And as you exhale, you're that expansive breath. So if we get exhale is going to keep us here to the best of your ability. pull your hips back, stand yourself tall and powerful. Shoulders, let everything settle. And we'll practice that standing decompression. We'll do it the traditional way where the toes are touching, the heels are separate. It's an awkward looking position, but man, when you do it well, it is just so good for you. So let's work on this. One thing that I know for sure is at no point am I telling anybody to do this. This is never a standing decompression. You know what? This is never a standing. The hip joints control everything in foundation. The hip joints begin their control in the standing decompression by rotating the right hip, rotating the left hip until the big toe joints touch. Spread the toes, spread the heels, and allow the knee joints to roll towards each other. That is the only moment that the knee joints might go forward a little bit. Allow them to touch. But the moment they touch, the hip joint is going to pull back and away. Pull the knees even tighter together. So wrap in and then pull the hips up and back, pulling the knees harder together. Pull the chin back. Feel that tension. It should already be a tug of war between the groin muscles and the lower back if you're in the right position. Bring the base of the skull wide and go into that long wing position. The chest is wide, the back of the shoulder is activated, but the shoulder blades are not retracting. You're wide, very broad. Wide as you can. From there, keep the tension of the groin muscles. Keep the knees wrapping towards each other like a scroll closing to center. Bring the arms forward. Chin back, chest up. You're going to find that a lot of you hike your shoulders up a little bit. Shoulders relax. Pull them forward. Breathe across the rib cage. I want you to practice that breath for maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 different decompression breaths. And then we'll go into a little bit more anatomy just to review a little bit of what you just felt. Keep going. So think of those SCM muscles as you're breathing, as you're inhaling. Think of the back of your skull pulling length. Think of the pec minors having length. Think of the rib cage front to back as a whole system. You're pushing as much pressure into the sides as you're pushing into the front, as you're pushing into the back, as you're pushing into the bottom, and the top. So I want you to remember that as you're doing it. It's not just kind of like a half-assed breath. I wish it was sometimes. It's a whole lot easier to explain, but it's not. It's very challenging. All right, so come on out of that. Shake it off a little bit. And now I believe we have a couple tutorials lined up for them. We have the anchoring tutorial. We have the decompression tutorial lined up. If I'm wrong, correct. Okay, cool. Yeah, so Paul, why don't you put the decompression breathing tutorial on real quick, and that will give us a moment to look up if there's any other additional questions or anything like that. It'll only run for about 3.5 minutes. Okay?
I want to teach you about decompression breathing. It's the basic principle of foundation training that is truly a part of every single exercise you're going to learn with us, so we might as well start now with the basics. It's a hard thing to learn. I wish it wasn't, but the truth is there is a very legitimate learning curve to decompression breathing. Don't let that scare you. Let that get you a little bit more curious about what potentially could happen and why after so many years I'm still teaching this. We'll start with the thumbs at the base of the rib cage. And when I say base of the rib cage, it's right when the ribs become the belly, right when that shelf occurs. The pinkies are going to go right to the front of the hip bone there, the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine, or the pointy bone you can feel at the ridge of your pelvis. That's a little shaka sign, like you're in Hawaii. That's your measuring stick. The basis of this is that A, you inhale up in 360 degrees, lifting the whole rib cage away from the pelvis. So you'll see the space change as Jesse inhales. What's more important about this measuring stick, though, is the exhale. While you feel all of this big, expansive, lung volume enhancing rib cage expansion, it's the exhale that maintains that expansion that is truly the trainer of decompression breathing. So let's think about that for a moment. You're inhaling into the chest, but you're also really deeply inhaling into the back of the ribs. The larger portion of the lung is kind of backward facing in the rib and can expand quite a bit posteriorly. And as you exhale, you're keeping the abdomen long and you're sort of pulling the belly in off your waistband as you push air out. So let's do that again. Inhale, massive, massive, big as you can comfortably into the ribs. Push the ribs out of the way, posteriorly, laterally, anteriorly. That means back, sides, and front. Push them out of the way, and as you exhale, keep them pushed out of the way. This is hard. This is the challenge of decompression breathing. It's not just expansion. It's the maintenance of expansion. It should feel like the belly is almost pulling off your waistband as you exhale. From there, chin back, chest up is a cue you're going to hear us give a lot throughout these programs. The base of the skull is going to lift away from the neck. Right where the head and neck join, you're going to lift that up really far. You're going to feel these front neck muscles, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, leveraging the sternum and clavicles upwards as you inhale. That's one of the ways that you know that you're doing this right. The base of the skull pulling up allows the sternum to be lifted towards it. Go ahead and relax fully.
If you're doing it right, you're working.
So if you're doing it right, you're working. And I want you to see what it looks like without the shirt on here. So Jesse's going to pop his shirt off. We're going to do the exact same thing, the same tutorial more or less. But I want you to see the muscles work a little bit. I want you to see the rib cage expansion. I want you to understand this stuff a little better. So first and foremost, let's line the feet up a little bit. I didn't do that on the first one, but it's an important piece to this. The outside edges of the feet are parallel when you're doing decompression breathing in the basic poses, like standing decompression or some of the others that we'll get into. From here, thumbs at the rib cage, pinkies at the pelvis. And what we're going to find is, you know what, go from a kind of a collapsed position first. You don't just want to pull yourself out of this position. You want to push yourself out of this position from the inside out. And that's where decompression breathing comes in. Watch as Jesse takes 2 or 3 breaths that literally reposition his rib cage, reposition his posture, and create a ring of tension from the lats to the rhomboids to the traps to the levator scapula to the pecs to the abdomen to the diaphragm to the obliques. There's a lot of stuff in there. And you want all of it working together to lift the torso and keep it high and powerful, not compressed and weak and uncomfortable. Because that sucks. You don't want to stay there. It's no fun. You want to feel good. One more. Chin back, chest up. Big 360 degree breath that primes muscles for contraction, gives the visceral organs room to be organs and operate and digest and produce, sometimes reproduce. All of these things are very important functions of physiology that need room to operate well. And if you're just sitting on them, they're not happy. Practice decompression breathing with every foundation training pose you do, and I bet you're going to start feeling better really, really fast.
All right, cool. Well, I think it sounds like we're having a couple technical things. So what I'm going to ask Paul to do is leave everybody with that anchoring tutorial that follows that up. And I will go ahead and just make the announcement to whoever's listening that we will do more of these as we figure out the technical side. If it's easier for us to do Instagram lives, or if it's easier for us to simply film workouts and then put those workouts out for you, I think that will be best. Ultimately, the goal is to give you additional materials, support our instructor community that is going through this hard time as well. Most of them are doctors or trainers or small business owners. So we want to support them to the best of our ability. And we want you to either go get sessions with our certified instructors via Skype, via FaceTime, whatever, or support us and follow our app, join our app, get a membership with us and learn our baseline programs, our surfing programs, our golfing programs, our all the things you look forward to getting back into when life returns to normal. Get better at it during this period with our app.
I want to give you a quick tutorial on the
additional
anchoring process, the anchoring principle of foundation training. A real fast rundown is that the muscles that support the arches of the feet, the inner legs, the groin, they all connect into the pubic symphysis at the base of the pelvis. And that all of them work together to not only lift the arches, but to kind of contract the inner legs towards center to help us stand up tall. Your arches aren't strong enough to just press you off the ground. That's not really the way it works. There's these connections throughout the body that are very supportive. And most of those connections are stronger at the proximal part of the body, where the hip joint is, as opposed to the distal, further away ends of the body, where the ankles or wrists are. You want proximal strength. You want distal range of motion. So let's work on proximal strength. The anchoring process starts, we'll use the founder for this one, with 3 points of contact on the foot pressing firmly into the ground. The ball joint of the big toe, ball joint of the pinky toe and the heel, but that they're pressing into the ground from the outside edges of the foot in a parallel position. If you look at this position, you see a little bit of internal rotation at the hip joint, a little bit more internal rotation at the feet. Not a lot, 3 to 5 degrees. The anchoring process is an isometric contraction that first comes from a little bit of a hip hinge, and next, with slightly bent knees and powerful feet, creates an inward or outward isometric contraction. Now, this contraction comes from the same place and the same position, whether it's an inward squeeze or an outward push. The inward squeeze is going to look like the ball joint of the big toe across to the opposite heel, like you're making a very short but wide X between your feet and squeezing towards the center of it. If you do it right, you're going to see the knee joints just move ever so slightly medially. They're not going to fold in. They're going to stay very powerful. And it's going to feel like the groin muscles are starting to shake a little bit. If you go into an outward anchor from the exact same position, all the stuff stays the same, but now the heel and the midfoot are pressing outward, away from each other. And all of a sudden, like magic, your glutes, your ischial tube, all of these hip IT band areas, all of the muscles that connect to them and all the joints that they connect to start to operate in this big, powerful IT band glute contraction. Like the chassis of your legs, the base of your legs is just working for you, supporting the upper torso. That's basic inward and outward anchoring. And now we're going to switch into a tall lunge decompression to show front to back anchoring in a scissoring motion. Let's go either leg, whichever one you want. Left leg forward, right leg back is great. In this position, we're going to use proximal strength to support the center of us. And that looks like a pair of scissors closing. So from that powerful decompressed position where you're just upright, your weight is distributed 50-50 front to back leg, you're going to take that front leg and pull it towards center. You're going to take that back leg and pull it towards center like a pair of scissors closing. It's going to feel like the hamstring on the front leg, the upper hamstring, and the back hip flexor on the back leg is going to be doing most of the work. And it gives you a platform that you can actually stand up taller from if you use it correctly. So that's 2 ways to use an anchor. Actually, technically 3 ways to use an anchor. In the hinged positions, you can go in or out. In a linear lunge decompression position, you just go straight in, driving force to the base of the pubic symphysis and then lifting the torso away from it as well as you can. You're going to get good at anchoring and decompression if you keep following along all these videos, but this is your first little go at it. Keep trying, keep practicing, see what you can figure out.